Well, hello once again. It's Lee Kreider with the Ohio Ram Show, giving a kind of a wrap-up report with Danny Chu, and we have our show host, Becky Finley, here with us this morning. How are you today, Becky? Have you recovered from Ram yet?
I'm still working on it, but doing much better. How are you, Lee?
I'm recovering too. It just seems like it takes a little more out of you every year, but and it's been a lot of years, but we're doing okay. So let's get Danny in here. Danny, in the replies I've gotten to some queries about how they like the show, they mentioned your unusual configuration here for us, and I think you need to explain why you appear to be laying down and you appear to be having no shirt on. I think people would like to know that.
Okay, well, as most people know, almost 3 years ago now, I had a crash riding my bicycle and broke my neck, which resulted in a spinal cord injury, leaving me paralyzed from the chest down. And when you have a spinal cord injury, there's at least a dozen things you have to worry about. And one of the main worries is skin breakdown. I had these bad pressure sores, and they kept me from riding my hand cycle for months. They take a long time to heal. And part of the healing process is you have to stay off your butt. So I'm pretty much laying down in bed probably 17 or 18 hours a day. And I'm only up in my wheelchair 6 hours a day. So that's why these broadcasts are from my queen-size bed, laying down sideways to keep the weight off of my butt, Lee, all right?
Okay, well, Danny, we're glad to have you here in any kind of configuration because you have so much information to offer us. So let's bring in our show host who's with us here, Becky.
Hey, Danny, so tell me a little bit about Shauna Hogan and your thoughts on that and what happened.
Okay, well, I have a history with Shauna because back when she set the women's speed record, I was racing against her as a man, and she would go out so fast that she would often lead all the solo men into Colorado. And then after that, only 3 or 5 of the fastest men would beat her. So, I mean, she's finishing 3 and 4 days faster then than she is now. So it's quite a big difference when you do Ram in your mid-30s, and now her racing age is 60. So I think Rick Bothling did the right thing in extending her another 19 hours to finish, 21 more hours, because the 60-plus men get 21 more hours than the other men. So why not the 60-plus women, since Shauna is in that category? So they decided instead of giving her 12 days, 21 hours, she had 13 days, 18 hours, and she finished in 13 days, 4.5 hours. So she still had 13 and a half hours of leeway to spare. And it was her slowest finish ever. And a remarkable statistic was she had 83 hours, almost 3.5 days of total stop time. That's probably a Ram record in itself. Mm-hmm. She also becomes the oldest solo female finisher this year, racing age 60. She establishes the new 60-plus speed record for women. And this is her 9th solo finish. That puts her in a very elite group. That moves her ahead of Wolfgang Fasching and I, who both had 8 finishes. And the only person that now has more solo finishes than Shauna would be Rob Kish with 19.
She's amazing, truly amazing.
Like you, I knew she probably had the most experience of any rider out in the race. Mm-hmm. So with that, her crew knew what to do when she had saddle sores in Colorado. They took her off the bike for an entire day.
So Danny, tell me a little bit about the men's race and how that went down.
Well, in a transition from the women's to men's, I will point out that there was a higher than average finishing rate this year among the solo riders. The women, 75% of the women finished and 63% of the men finished. And normally those numbers are down closer to 50%. So it was a good year for finishes. And some interesting statistic in the men's race. And that was my old colleague, Perry Stone, who I used to cover the race with back in the 2000s. He pointed out that the time gap between Strausser and the second place under 50 rider was actually not quite as big as the time gap between 50 plus winner and second overall, Marco Bello, and the second place 50 plus rider, because after David Haas and Mark Pattinson dropped out, there were really no fast 50 plus riders left in the race. So that's why there's this huge time gap between Marco Bello and the second 50 plus rider. Pretty interesting statistic. Was that Olsen from Denmark?
Right.
What surprised is how young he is. He's only 25 years old.
Yeah.
So he's the future of the solo Ram. And I mean, if and when Christoph Strausser retires, I see this guy winning, taking over, the reign as the winner. Also, I noted that this year, if you include the 60 to 69 and the over 70, that there were more riders over 50 than under 50 in the solo men's race. Isn't that interesting? I'm also hoping that with the top two overall solo women being in the 50 plus category, that we will see more numbers in the 50 and 60 plus for the women, which have been very low in recent years. Yeah. This was the first year there was ever a 60 plus rider with Shauna. And normally the last two times that Shauna finished, there were only two women in the 50 plus, her and Kathy Wallace. And so, and this year, although there were only two women in the 50 plus, they were extremely high quality. And the winner, Daniela and Leah Goldstein, I mean, they both smashed Shauna's old 50 plus record by quite a bit this year. And I think it was the year of the 50 plus riders, with the women getting first and second overall, and with Marco Bello getting second overall, the first time a 50 plus has ever done that in the men's race. Pretty much it was the year of the 50 plus. Lee, do you agree?
I think so. And, we've talked about that age thing a little earlier, and I have a theory. I don't know if it'll hold up. In ultra cycling, you have to know your body very well, what it can do and what it can't do. And I think, as it was my experience while I was able to ride, that the older I got, the smarter I was about what I could do and I couldn't do.
Yes, it's because Ram is 50% mental and 50% physical. So when you get over 50, although you might lose a little bit of power output on the physical side, you could make up for it by riding smarter.
Right.
And that's what we're seeing in these 50 plus riders. Both of the riders had won the race before. Daniela had won back in 2009, and Leah Goldstein had won back in 2011. So as winners, they came back with a good knowledge of the race and what to do.
So do you think that also plays into the team ones as well?
You mean the team races? The team is more about strategy, when to trade off, than the solos.
But I was so impressed with the Golden Girls, and obviously they're older in age as well.
Yeah, the same thing. Using your mind to ride smarter would also apply to the team race. But like Lee said, when you're older, you have to use your smarts to ride within your limits better than, say, when you were younger, because you could get in more trouble if you overdo it when you're older. The body can come back and recover faster when it's younger.
Yeah, and of course, we're waiting to hear how the Golden Girl rider Hills is. They had a tragic accident. It was just outside Clarksburg, West Virginia. They think she hit a pothole and went down. Brian, her crew chief, told me that both of her tires were flatted. So that kind of bespeaks something like that happening. So we wish them well. We'll be updating you with any information we get. Well, Becky and I were together at Oxford when they came through, weren't we, Becky?
Yes, we were.
I don't know who was on the bike at the time. I couldn't catch that, but she was really perking right along. I mean, there was no evidence. Danny, another theory about men and women, if you're ready for this.
Yes.
Let's hear this.
Yeah, Becky. Now, Becky, you can contradict me if you will.
Should we put earmuffs on?
No. Women ride happier. That's the only way I can say it. Women ride happier. You talk about Danielle Genovese. Has anybody ever seen her in wind, in rain, in sleep deprivation, where she wasn't happy. Men, they always seem kind of bedraggarts. There's something about this, Becky. What do you think? Well, you're a marathoner. You watch this. You've watched this.
Lee, sometimes there's just not much else you can do but just smile, right? I mean, what else could you do? Cry? I was just going to say, I do agree with Danny. Danny just mentioned that sleep is very integral to the mentalness of RAM. And even as crew chief, right, the sleep really helps with the mental game of just enjoying and being part of in the moment. So the sleep is hugely integral to that. So
I would
I
say
totally
the
agree.
one exception to my sleep rule would be Christoph Strausser, because he does the entire race on 6 hours of sleep, and yet he always manages to look happy, for the interviews, right, Lee? When the media interviews
Yeah,
him?
but as I
He
told you,
should be a zombie on wheels on that little sleep,
I told you before, Danny, that when you're doing your statistics,
Yes.
just take Strasser off the spreadsheet because he skews everything.
He's
Whether
an,
it's sleep,
an outlier, they call that.
he's an outlier,
Mhm.
yes. But he's been wonderful for the sport as well.
Well, while RAM's going on, there's also a huge unsupported race called the Trans-American Bike Race, or the Trans Am.
Right.
So, but Lee thinks these things may be the future of ultra cycling because they are gaining appeal. Lee, what do you think?
Well, Becky and I have been talking about the future of the Ohio Ram Show a little bit. We have not too much, but we'll be talking more about it. And one of the things we want to do, Danny, is maybe expand into some of these other ultra events more, like the unsupported, like gravel, the Tour de Divide, that's going on now also, I think, or if not pretty close. These events are getting more popular, and I think we'd like to kind of cover them a bit more. What do you think, Becky?
I agree. I agree. I think the sport is expanding quickly, so it'd be good for us to stay in touch with that. So
Becky is the marketing person, it seems like, all of a sudden. She's kind of pushing me a little bit, Danny.
Hey, Danny, anything else? Any other feedback, comments?
Well, the other thing I want to congratulate the Bothlings who've been running RAM for over a dozen years now for turning it into a successful business. And one of the big things that did that was the time limits. Back when I raced RAM, you had to finish within 2 days, 48 hours of the winner. If you were over 50, you got an extra day, so 72 hours. And if you were over 60, you had 4 days. But think about that. This year, I think maybe only 1 or 2 riders finished within 2 days of Strausser. With the old rules, there'll only be 3 finishers. So what the Barclays did is actually Lon Haldeman did this when he was the race director in 2000 to 2002. Instead of depending on the winner's time, he would set flat time limits. So you no longer have to curse out a fast winner for you not finishing officially to 12 days flat. And if you were over 60 and a woman, you got an extra 21 hours, 12 days, 21 hours. And what this did is it made a lot more people that might be slower that knew they could finish in 12 days, but not under 10 to do the solo race. Yeah. And also, I think the Team RAM is a great feeder and the raw into the solo race. Because when I raced, there was no raw, and there were only a few teams. But people like to transition from team into solo and from raw into solo. So do you agree that these are great transitional races before the solo?
I
well, yeah,
I think
yes. And one thing I've observed, Danny, being able to ride 400 miles in 24 hours does not it'll officially qualify you for the race, but it really doesn't qualify you. And I think so many people think, well, if I get that 400 miles under my belt, I'm ready to go. We need to be doing longer races before we try to tackle something like RAM, and Raw fills that gap nicely. Dex Took's No Country for Old Man, I think it's 1,000 miles. I think it's 1,000 miles, a nice qualifier. There's some other 1,000-mile events coming up. Divya Tata over in India is starting to run some of the longer events. And she's got this wonderful race, the highest ultra cycling event, maybe the highest cycling event in the world, where she has an event over the Himalayan mountains. And I think, Danny, the highest pass is something like 17,000 feet. That is 7,000 feet higher than Wolf Creek Pass. Okay, well, listen, thank you, Danny, for all the time you gave us and your statistics. I think everybody enjoys it. And Becky, thank you so much for coming on board as host. And we didn't see much of you during the race because you were crew chief, and you found out that's a pretty demanding job, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. It's been nice working with you, and nice to meet you, Becky.
Nice to meet you too, Danny. Take care of
Okay.
yourself.
Okay, bye.